I'm Andy Katz, along with my co-host Seth Greenberg on the latest edition of Courtside with Katz and Coach G. We're going to break down the top 16 with NCAA Tournament Selection Committee Chair Mark Hollis, and also be joined by South Carolina head coach Frank Martin.
This is The Right Time with Bomani Jones on ESPN Radio or on the ESPN app.
Hope you're enjoying the start to your weekend. Bomani is off. Dickerson and Hood sitting in on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We are presented by Progressive Insurance, creators of the Name Your Price tool. Choose from a range of coverage options and pick the price that works for you. NBA All-Star festivities are taking place this weekend in New Orleans. They'll all be on ESPN, ESPN Radio. But Draymond Green, Jonathan, in the news again this week, not really for the All-Star game, but for some comments he made about James Dolan, who I don't think anyone likes. I mean, he's the Knicks owner, and he had the whole controversy with Charles Oakley recently, and he's kind of a extremely unpopular figure around the league, and fans of the Knicks, they hate the franchise, and they just can't win. But Draymond Green, though, took it a little further. These were his comments about James Dolan, Jonathan, on the Draft Day podcast. Take a listen.
This is Charles Oakley. Why is he buying a ticket to the game? If I'm not mistaken, Dolan's was owning that team when he was playing. It wasn't a problem when he was speaking out then. It wasn't a problem when he was protecting their superstars then. And so if it wasn't a problem then when he were doing it for y'all, why is it all of a sudden a problem now when he speak out on something that he don't like? And now you want to disown him from your entire organization. That's a slave mentality. You're doing it for me, it's all good. But now you're doing it against me, or not necessarily against me, but you're speaking out against my organization. It's not good anymore. That's a slave mentality, slave master mentality. That's ridiculous. It was all fine and dandy when he was laying people out, taking fines.
Laying out Jordan, right?
Taking fines and all this stuff for your organization. But now all of a sudden when he says something that he feels, it's a problem. I disagree with that. I definitely think, like I said, that that's a slave master mentality.
So when you heard that, Jonathan, what was your first reaction?
Well, his remarks saying that James Dolan has a slave master mentality in regards to the Oakley situation, his point is that it's okay for Oakley to work for Dolan, but it's not okay for Oakley to sit in the stadium and watch the Knicks as a fan or be around the organization because he's not doing anything for the Knicks besides just being a fan and rooting for the organization. So his comment is super strong, but it hits home to a lot of people. But here's the thing. I understand what he means by that, and sure, that comment saying that's a slave master mentality, that's going to turn some heads. There's no doubt about that. I understand what he means by that. He's saying that, hey, you know what? Here's someone that's worked hard in the organization for you. This guy should be part of your organization. Why should he have to pay tickets to be at a Knicks game? But there's a disconnect even before this between James Dolan and Charles Oakley for whatever reason. And that's why you have the commissioner, the best commissioner in sports, and Adam Silver, along with Michael Jordan via the conference call, Dolan and Oakley sitting down at the table to discuss this. So I understand his point. I don't know if I would have used slave master mentality in that, but I understand the point. But my advice to Draymond Green is very simple, Jeff, is that you need to focus on your team and your brand. There's nothing wrong with speaking out, and the reason why it's not is because Steve Kerr allows this to happen. There's some organizations that they don't want players to be able to speak out on certain issues, but more and more now in 2017, especially with the Golden State Warriors, you can have Black Lives Matter T-shirts. You can speak out on social issues, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not, because that's part of your personality. Draymond loves to talk, and he loves to stir the pot. He loves to be the stick in the beehive. That's who he is. But I think that, for me, I'm using a different term, but he used slave master mentality, saying that Dolan should treat Oakley better.
Well, Green came back, though, and clarified his comments. This is the latest from Draymond Green on the NBA on ESPN Radio.
I never said James Dolan has a slave master mentality. I said when you look at something and someone has, they're doing something for someone and all of a sudden they can't anymore, that falls under the slave mentality. However, I think a lot of people has kind of giving it the racial thing and whether, James Dolan is a racist and this and that and the other. I can't say James Dolan is a racist. I don't know James Dolan. Honestly, if he walked past me right now, I wouldn't know who he is. So for me to say that he's a racist, what I said was I thought it was unfair the way Oakley was treated. I thought some of the things that was said about Charles Oakley from James Dolan, from the New York Knicks Twitter handle, I thought some of the things that was said about Oakley was wrong.
Well, here's my thought on this one. I think what Draymond Green was trying to say, Jonathan, and he's right, is that Dolan is a hypocrite. But when you use the phrase slave master mentality, you open it up to all kind of different interpretations. So I think that was the mistake. I mean, you could have gotten your point across, I think, just as clearly if you would have just said that James Dolan is a hypocrite. He loves Charles Oakley when he's brash and kind of, loud and a little abusive and beating guys up on the court, but he can't take it when any of the criticism is directed towards himself. I mean, that's a very hypocritical way to act. But I think that the reason that people interpreted it the way they did is because, now you tell me, am I wrong? Whenever someone hears the phrase slave master mentality, how can the first thing they think of not be race? That there's some sort of racial accusation taking place here.
And there is my disconnect, and there's my issue with Draymond Green. See, in the first breath, I'm telling you before we played that cut that I understand what he meant by that because I've heard that phrase before, slave master mentality, and I already laid out for you exactly what I thought that what he should have said or what he did say, saying that James Dolan should be able to welcome a fan favorite in Oakley into the building. He shouldn't have to pay a ticket for it. They should have squashed their beef, whatever their problem is, before the incident. But then when you get to a different platform and you walk the comments back and saying that slave master mentality has nothing to do with race, okay, so now who's the hypocrite now? See, I'm good with you if you just tell me how you feel. Now, I can sit here and I can agree or disagree, but if your initial reaction to James Dolan is that you feel that what he did has a slave master mentality, clearly you're talking about James Dolan. And whether or not you believe that he's a racist or not, I think it's the same issue. And I'm thinking that from Draymond's standpoint, if that's how you feel, stick with your feelings. But don't walk it back and say it was taken out of proportion because this is what you said. Yeah, you don't know James Dolan. You see the situation on the surface as it is, white owner with a black player, and you think it's a slave master mentality. If that's how you feel, that's fine. Again, if it's from my standpoint, there's a different way for me to say that, but that's how you felt. So why in the second breath, in the second cut we just heard, he's kind of walking things back and kind of moving away from his comments. If you believe that James Dolan is a slave master or has a slave master mentality, saying that it's okay for Charles Oakley to play for me, but not enough to sit in my arena, then you stick with that comment. But now he's walking it back almost to the point of apology.
Well, if you don't know the guy, how can you really use that phrase? That's the issue there. If you don't know someone, and if you wouldn't even know a guy if you walk past you on the street, that's some pretty heavy language to use when describing someone's behavior, isn't it? I mean, again, I think that there were a lot of ways, and maybe they wouldn't have gotten as much attention. Maybe that's what he wanted. But there were a lot of ways to describe James Dolan's conduct. I don't think using slave master mentality had to be used. I mean, I think the guy is clearly a hypocrite. He's sensitive. He can't take criticism. But he's like every other owner. I mean, they all live in their little bubbles. They don't want to hear about any sort of complaints from fans or former players or broadcasters or media. All they do is, whine about it. So I think what Green has done almost unintentionally, Jonathan, is to some, not everybody, but to some, he almost made Dolan a sympathetic figure here.
Yep.
Because it is a little unfair. It's very unfair to label him as that when you don't know him. And if you don't know someone, you can't label someone that. Because I don't think Dolan should be a sympathetic figure to Knicks fans because he's doing a terrible job. And when the organization's terrible and they make all the wrong moves and they're in complete chaos. So I just think this whole thing backfired on Draymond Green.
we have talked about this over the years, you and I, doing shows, and you know this about athletes. Some athletes are so comfortable in situations where there's not an ESPN mic, there's not a Fox mic, there's not TV cameras, there's not a sports radio station that they have to go to be able to do these interviews. He's on a podcast where he's chilling, laid back, just saying what's off the top of his head. And notice the difference between the comments from his podcast and the comments made to ESPN. Now the comments are clarified because now the scrutiny's there. There's sometimes where you have athletes that go into FM stations, that we've talked about this before, where a athlete will go to an FM station, a hip-hop, an R&B pop station, and just chill and figure like no one's going to hear it besides that audience. And then something comes out from that. It's like, oh, I said that, but only to this room. Only to
Power
audience.
99. I think you guys are going to hear it.
Well, wait, I just thought I did it to Power 99 where hip-hop lives. I didn't know that you guys at the sports radio would pick this up. But there's the comfort level. Draymond Green was comfortable in saying what he said. Gets to ESPN, it's like, well, if he walked up to me right now, I wouldn't know who he is. I can't say that James Dolan's a racist, but he has a slave master mentality. You just have to be able to know what you're saying at all times. Be aware of what you're saying. Understand your brand. Understand the Golden State Warriors brand. And if you really do feel that way, stand by your comments if that's how you feel. And again, it's up to you and I to break it down. But if that's what you stand on it.
Speaking of NBA teams that are basically dumpster fires, our hometown team, the Chicago Bulls, what a disaster they are. They've got one real commodity, Jimmy Butler. It's the talk of All-Star Weekend. Will Chicago trade Butler before the deadline? Let's talk about that coming up next. It's the right time with Bomani Jones, Dickerson and Hood. We're in for Bomani on ESPN Radio.
For the first time ever, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee revealed the current top 16 seeds prior to Selection Sunday. Does Jay Williams think this is a good idea? Find out Monday morning on Mike and Mike starting at 6 Eastern on ESPN Radio and ESPN2.
Interesting, thought-provoking, or at the very least, entertaining. This is the most fascinating thing in the world today. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Bomani's off today. Dickerson and Hood are filling in. It's the Right Time on ESPN Radio, ESPN app, Sirius XM Channel 80. You know what's always in season, Jonathan? Surprising a friend or loved one with a bouquet from 1-800-Flowers.com. 1-800-Flowers has amazing offers on bouquets starting at just $29.99. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. Here's the most amazing thing to me.
What?
The Chicago Bulls disgust me, okay? We're at the NBA All-Star Weekend. We're at the break now.
Man.
Come on. This franchise...
Yes.
Since the dynasty with Jordan ended after they won the 1998 championship, this franchise has made the Eastern Conference Finals once. No finals appearances. One time in the Eastern Conference Finals. They had arguably the best coach in basketball, or one of the best coaches in basketball, in Tom Thibodeau. Couldn't get along with him. He leaves. They hire Fred Hoiberg. They want to get younger and more athletic, so they signed Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade. That makes no sense.
Right.
And there's reports out in Chicago that their team president and their GM are going to be back next year, that everything's okay, and they're going to rebuild competitively. No, they are not. If you want to rebuild in the NBA and you can't attract the big-name free agents, which Chicago cannot. They wanted LeBron. They got Carlos Boozer. All right? That's how it works in Chicago with the Bulls. It doesn't work that way. You got to get as many lottery picks as possible. And even then, it's no guarantee. But there's no worse place to be than 7th or 8th in the Eastern Conference, is where they're at right now. And the only guy they can trade to get back something of significance, potentially, is Jimmy Butler. and they might be dragging their feet on that. I just don't know where this whole thing is headed.
Well, the only reason why that we have a 28 and 29 ball club in a segment on Bomani Jones show is because of Jimmy Butler, because that's really the only player that's worth talking about. They already have a Hall of Famer in Dwayne Wade that is established as a veteran on this team. But Jimmy Butler is a guy that is a star, not an all-star, not like a megastar yet, but definitely a star in this league. And so the question has been out there through the first half of the season on whether or not Jimmy Butler is going to be traded, or B, does he still want to be in Chicago? There was a disconnect in the first half of the season in which Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler took it upon themselves to call out the team because of the way they've underachieved, because you would think that with Rajon Rondo, whatever you think of Rondo as a player, as a lead guard, with Butler and Wade, that they'd be better than 28 and 29. And so there's question marks, Jeff, on whether or not Jimmy Butler even wants to stay in Chicago. Now, I think he likes the city, but I find it interesting that last night he took on a team that he's been rumored to go to in Boston. And I know if you're a Celtics fan, you definitely would love to see Jimmy Butler be on the Celtics, because that inches you even closer to Cleveland in the East. So, from Chicago's standpoint, they're just trying to do it half pregnant. You cannot do that. Either you're going to pare back payroll and get younger, or you're going to add more payroll and try to be a contender in the East. You cannot be in the middle. You cannot do that, and Chicago's trying to do that by trying to piecemeal veterans together and trying to be competitive to fill up the United Center.
I'm not in favor of getting rid of great players. I don't mean, the last thing you want to do is create an unnecessary hole on your roster. However, I see no other way around this for Chicago. Mm-hmm. There's no magic potion. There's no one all-star. There's no LeBron coming to Chicago. There's no Durant coming to Chicago. Westbrook isn't going to come to Chicago. So if you're not going to get a franchise-changing free agent, which they have proven time and time again, they are simply incapable of doing. I love the idea of Dwayne Wade 6 years ago. 6 years ago, that was hot. Okay? 2016, when he signed, not so much. He's just at the end. It's just a retirement tour. He's just making some extra money and calling it a day. You need high draft picks. And when you're finishing 7th or 8th every year, you're not getting that. Now, sometimes you'll luck into a Jimmy Butler late in the first round, and that was wonderful. And that's a good, little feather in their cap, if you will, of guys they've gotten. But for every Jimmy Butler, there's been a Doug McDermott, who you moved up and you got. Is Teague even in the league anymore?
No, Teague is not.
Yeah. There's been Tyrus Thomases along the way. I mean, there's. Sure. So I love Jimmy Butler. I mean, he's a great player. He probably deserves better than the situation he has right now. And losing him would be tough, and it would be a real bad second half to the season, a season that's already going to end with probably a first-round exit regardless. But I don't know how you're going to take that step forward without taking a couple of major steps back. And that's something the Bulls have just been unwilling to do, and it's really hurt them.
That's the big conundrum for any team, Jeff, of when you have an asset, can you build around that asset? How quickly can you build around that asset? Or do you trade that asset to try to get younger and build through the draft and eventually through free agency? And so that's always very difficult. Most free agents that are out there will look at three things in determining whether or not they want to come to a team. One of them is family, if they have family, with their significant other, their girlfriend, their boo, their dip, or their wife, or all four.
Or both, all the above.
All four, yeah. So you have that. You have finances. Obviously, finances is really big. How much money can I make, whether it's the contract with the team or off the court? And, of course, rings. How close am I to a championship? It's always those three things. And so the Bulls have money. Sure, they have money to spend. And, of course, there's a number of these guys that have family, but are you close to a championship? The answer is no. You got to the point now where Chicago is not necessarily a destination, has not been for a while for A-list free agents. No. They'd rather go to Florida or Texas with no state tax. They'd rather go to other places where they can get themselves a championship, and Chicago's not even close to that.
No, it is it's a sad state of affairs, so we'll see before the deadline if Jimmy Butler is moved. It'd be the right thing to do, but this franchise rarely does the right thing. Let's squeeze in a little baseball talk coming up next. Rob Manfred has listed a bunch of proposals that he thinks are going to help Major League Baseball. We'll go through those next. It's Dickerson and Hood. We're in today for Bomani. It's the right time on ESPN Radio. Handcrafted? It's all the rage, from flour-pressed soap to homemade hot sauce to pickles. Whatever those are, Firestone Complete Auto Care is glad it's catching on because they've been handcrafting repairs since 1926. Their 4,000 certified technicians work hard every day to help your cars run like new. They back the work with their fixed right promise, guaranteeing your car is fixed right, your repair is priced right, your repair is priced right, and the work is completed right on time. Keep your car running newer, longer. Be prepared for winter, spring, summer, and fall with Firestone FR710 all-season tires. Now 10% off at Firestone Complete Auto Care. Whatever you drive a Firestone. Certain conditions apply to fixed right promise. Visit driveafirestone.com or see store for details.
ESPN Radio Sports Center.
I'm Christine Lisi. Here's what's happening. NBA Western Conference All-Stars Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, teammates this weekend for the first time since Durant left OKC for Golden State as a free agent last summer. Neither wanted to talk about their relationship during today's All-Star media availability. Westbrook avoided every question about Durant by redirecting his answer to fashion. Paul George told ESPN's Mark Stein on ESPN Radio's Meet the All-Stars show, but he stopped short of saying it's an automatic thing that he'll sign the estimated $219 million extension the Pacers are expected to offer him this summer. George said he wants a chance to play or a chance to win a championship. NHL Penguins defenseman Oli Mata will be out 6 weeks recovering from hand surgery. Dodgers first baseman Adrian Gonzalez will be limited at least another 2 weeks as he deals with inflammation in his right elbow. He'll be tested in 2 weeks. His status for Mexico at the World Baseball Classic is uncertain. Marlins team president David Sampson says multiple groups are interested in purchasing the franchise. He also confirmed owner Jeffrey Loria is being considered for nomination as the U.S. ambassador to France.
When you come to Applebee's for an all-in burger with fries and a bottomless Pepsi for just $9.99, you also get a shot at great instant win prizes. Sink your teeth into that. No purchase necessary. Open to legal 50 U.S. 18+. See rules at allintowinsweeps.com.
You've got the right time on ESPN Radio. Dickerson and Hood. We're in today for Bomani. We are presented by Progressive Insurance. All guests appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance line, and reach us on the 1-800-FLOWERS Twitter feed at TweetJHood, at Dickerson ESPN, at ESPN Radio. And tune in this Sunday for the 66th NBA All-Star Game live from New Orleans. Coverage begins at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on most ESPN radio stations.
We have got this shift on Sunday before the All-Star Game and also on Monday on President's Day, don't we?
We are working on President's Day, which I found out is a company holiday. But we will be here for you, filling in for Bomani on Monday from 4 to 7 Eastern. So we're happy to be here. And, you know, look, I know that baseball takes a back seat right now because you've got NBA All-Star Weekend. Mm-hmm. Before you know it, the tournament talk is going to start really heating up in college basketball. NFL free agency is on the horizon beginning next month, the Combine in a couple of weeks. But, I mean, spring training is underway. So, I mean, as two big baseball fans, certainly baseball is kind of at the forefront of our thought process. And Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, just said recently that he is certainly thinking about ways to speed up the pace of play in baseball. And there's a couple things specifically that he's talking about. Raising the strike zone, eliminating the intentional walk, and streamlining the instant replay process. Let me say of those three, Jonathan, don't eliminate the intentional walk. That's a strategy tool. Can't do that. Can't change the game of baseball that way. I would not raise the strike zone. I think the strike zone is the strike zone. And one of the charming things about baseball is that every umpire strike zone is a little bit different, and pitchers and hitters have to adjust. That's gamesmanship. That's part of the game. But the instant replay process, yeah. How about make that faster? And here's a novel idea. How about get the calls right? I think of all the sports that use instant replay, I don't know if there's a sport that gets it wrong more than baseball.
I would agree with you on that. When I put it to you this way, when it happens in the NFL, it's a surprise. When a catch is not a catch, of course, that the NFL and their rule book is something that we could do hours on. But when it comes to instant replay, more times than not, the NFL gets it right. The 99 times out of 100, if it's the one time that they get it wrong, it really is magnified because it doesn't happen very often in the NFL. With Major League Baseball, though, it's very simple. Two things that Manfred really has to change. Commissioner Manfred has to do two things. One thing is, as you mentioned, the instant replay. Baseball can be very long anyway, as you and I both know, 3 hours plus. So you don't want that lag time when action is supposed to be taking place. It should be cut down. You should be able to know whether or not that guy is safe or out at first base on a bang-bang play. You should know if it's a catch or not by looking at it quickly. The NFL gets it done quickly, so why can't baseball? So that's number one. But the thing that's not mentioned in this piece for Commissioner Manfred that he has to do, never mind about the strike zone, never mind about, the intentional walk. That doesn't take up that much time. You know what it is? Baseball has to be mainstream again. That's the issue with baseball. It's not about time. If you adjust the time, then it's just going to be changes that's going to take place. It's not going to bring people to the ballpark because the time has changed. Baseball isn't mainstream enough. It continues to be more local, more regional, and that's the issue. Football's not like that. Basketball's not like that, but baseball continues to be. That's the issue. How can you put baseball on the front of mind of millennials, that baseball is the sport to be at, is the thing to watch, is the thing to download? That's what Manfred's got to keep his focus on.
I don't know if you can, unless your team that you root for in the city you live in is really good. I just don't think you're going to be able – like the example that we would always use on our shows in Chicago is that I could walk into a bar right now in Denver and sit down and have a great conversation with probably anybody in that bar about the Broncos and the Bears.
Yes.
Like I could have a conversation with anyone about the Broncos and it would be great. But I don't think I could walk into the same bar and have an in-depth conversation about the Rockies or vice. Now the Cubs might be different because that was such a hot story last year. But let's say 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, before the Cubs got good again, no one in Denver knew about the Cubs, and no one in Chicago knew about the Rockies. I'm not saying like no one, but you know what I'm saying. The overwhelming majority did not. But you could even walk into a bar in Jacksonville if you want to, and talk about the Jaguars, and we can lament about Blake Bortles.
Sure.
But it would be hard to walk into a bar in Tampa and talk about the Rays in depth for anyone that really isn't in that area that follows that team on a day-to-day basis. But I just don't know if that's going to be anything that you can overcome.
Well, I think you have to work on it. If David Stern turned the NBA around from a drug-infested half-a-house league with regional television and the finals on tape delay and turn it around, baseball could turn it around. Sure, they could turn it around, but that's the issue, though, Jeff. You have to make sure, and I think that the extra wild card in the play-in game makes it even more fun, but that's something that, again, way above our pay grade and way before, over our heads as far as how they do it. But you have to market it better. And I know that when we read this article today, you and I as Gen Xers, it doesn't affect us one way or the other because, again, growing up watching baseball, being my favorite sport, it doesn't matter how long the game is. It's not a movie. It has no clock. So I got nowhere to go. If I'm going to go to the ballpark, I'm invested in being there for 3+ hours if that's what it takes, as long as my favorite team wins, as long as I'm entertained. But this whole thing where you're going to try to be as close to basketball or football as possible, that's not going to happen. You've got to be able to make sure that baseball is not falling apart, where it's the third or fourth or fifth sport as far as the mainstream is concerned in this country. That's what Manfred's got to think about the future, not about us. Hey, we're old, and they've got plenty of our money, and we take our kids to the games and all that. But what about our kids? What about the kids that are 5 or 10 years old? What are you going to do for the game from their standpoint? What do you do then?
I guess all you can do is try to pour enough resources as you can into making sure that young kids continue to play the game. Mm-hmm. Trumpet it as a better alternative for your kids than football. It's safer.
Your son loves baseball, loves it, and that's like his number one sport, right?
Yeah, I would say. Well, I mean, he changes, every couple months. He cycles through, but he does. But he loves it because we took him to games when he was young. Really, he's only 6. We took him to games starting when he was like 3 or 4, and he loves to play baseball. Loves to go outside, and he doesn't really play many. We don't have a video game system. He doesn't have an iPad. He broke that in a fit of rage a couple months ago. Doesn't have an iPad for games or anything. Yeah. Who knows why he did, but he did. So he goes outside and he plays. I mean, baseball is a great sport, and I know that it's a different era, but I don't mind investing 2.5 hours in a baseball game, even 3 hours in a baseball game. Especially if I'm at the game. Like, I'm okay with that, so I'm not as worried about the time, but I am worried that when your team falls out of it and it's in May or June, there's no reason. Like, they got to find a way to keep people engaged when teams are completely out of it. The NFL, you can do that because even though you're terrible, it's only 16 weeks.
Right.
And then you're looking ahead to the draft next year. See, in the baseball, you don't really have that luxury because the draft is so hit or miss, and it's not trumpeted like the NFL draft. So there's certain things working against baseball that they can't duplicate exactly what the NFL has mastered, but I just think getting kids playing younger and connecting them with the stars of the game is the only way you're going to keep their interest.
It's that draft is like a documentary, like a 4 or 5 day documentary. That baseball draft does not, as you mentioned, does not bring eyeballs to the TV unless you're just a diehard baseball fan. You don't know if those kids are going to go to college or if they're going to be on your team. So it's a little bit different, as you mentioned, than basketball or football because the draft is a selling point for fans too, especially the NFL draft, which is the king. And so you're right. Baseball's got a way to go, but you got to start on it. You just can't quit. You got to go on it. But this arbitrary stuff about, if we just give the intentional walk a pass and just say, no, don't throw 4 pitches, it wastes time. No, that's not the issue. The issue is how do you market and how do you make baseball even more popular with the younger generation to make it cool? It isn't not a steroid-filled home run race either. That's not going to get it done. You got to do more than that because we already saw that before.
No, I think kids also like defense. I mean, they appreciate the great defense up the middle. I mean, there's a lot of exciting plays in Major League Baseball, but it's tricky. But, I mean, raising the strike zone, I just don't think. And the intentional walk. I mean, It's an intentional walk. It's part of the game. It's strategy. If you don't want the pitchers throwing, then just point to first base and be done with it.
I mean, here's the thing with the intentional walk. I mean, at least it's action. I'd rather see the intentional walk than umpires looking at a monitor for 6 minutes to determine whether or not a guy is safe or out at third base.
Earlier in the hour, we had Draymond Green teeing up James Dolan. Now Charles Oakley is still at it. This feud is running longer than the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. We'll give you the latest in this one coming up next. Dickerson and Hood. We're in for Bo. It's the right time. This is ESPN Radio.
Google it.
The NBA's free agency deadline is next Thursday. Who needs to make a move to become a serious contender? Get the very latest Monday morning at 6 Eastern with Mike and Mike on ESPN Radio and ESPN2.
got the right time. Dickerson and Hood in for Bomani on ESPN Radio. It's the most decorated documentary of the year, winning over 45 awards, including the Directors Guild of America, the Producers Guild of America, and 4 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards for Best Documentary Feature. Critics have declared it a triumph, a landmark achievement, the #1 documentary of the year, and now it's an Academy Award nominee. OJ Made in America, available in its entirety on the ESPN app and on Watch ESPN. When do you think Charles Oakley is going to stop giving interviews about the Knicks and James Dolan?
When the phone stops ringing. That's when he will.
This is the latest. Oakley to Sports Illustrated compares Dolan to Donald Sterling. Oakley hesitated when asked if he considered Dolan a racist. We would cover that with Draymond Green, but did not deny a connection to Sterling. Quote, Dolan's on the same level. This man has been around for a long time. I've never heard anything good about him. This is going to end up like what happened with the L.A. Clippers. It's that bad.
So Dolan also has a girlfriend that's on roller skates with an oversized visor? He calls me my silly wabbit. Your what? My silly wabbit. What are you saying, ma'am?
I can't see you with your visor.
With that huge visor.
How do you drive with that on, ma'am?
Is that what Dolan's rolling with? So some woman with an oversized visor just like Donald Sterling? Big Magic Johnson. What has he ever done? Oh, gosh.
Big man, Magic Johnson.
Big man, Magic Johnson. That's my favorite, one of my favorite underrated Libertard cuts that he doesn't play very often anymore. That's one of my favorite. Big Magic Johnson. What has he ever done? Jeff. So Charles Oakley, it's funny. I just talked to him 2 weeks ago before all this happened. Isn't that weird? I talked to him on my NBA radio show about the whole thing with LeBron James and the disconnect there with LeBron James and Charles Barkley. I just talked to him 2 weeks ago, and then all this happens. I think that Charles Oakley needs to just step away. If he's going to sue Dolan and the Madison Square Garden, just go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
But the idea that you just continue to just talk about it now, when another racist man comes up, then you're saying that he's along the lines of James Dolan. It makes me wonder. So what was that conversation about with Adam Silver, Jordan, and when he sat down with James Dolan? What happened there?
I guess that didn't work. I thought it was working. I thought it was going to be a peace accord. I guess it just didn't work. Yeah, look, if I'm Oakley and I know that he feels wronged, and certainly it's been a huge story and a huge controversy, this one might be better left to just kind of fade away. Like every time he does an interview, you're going to see the B-roll of him getting taken down by the security. You know what I mean? Like, yes. Maybe just kind of let it go and sue him. If you want to sue him, sue him.
Sue him, but just stop doing interviews. Stop talking about it. Like, I know it's a nightmare for him, and I know it hurts, but man, it's just like, what else are you going to say about Dolan? Do something or stop doing interviews. Either one.
All guests on this show appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Let's get to some NFL coming up next. Big debate in the NFL. Will the Patriots trade Jimmy Garoppolo, and to who? That's next. Dickerson and Hood in for Bomani.
Barry Jenkins is nominated for not only Best Director, but also Best Adapted Screenplay.
It's surreal, man. You know, I've had a very privileged experience with this film.
The big screen's biggest night, the Oscars, and Cinephile will be there. Get all the details at Cinephile, the Adnan Virk movie podcast. Available now on the ESPN app and iTunes.
What's up, Fight fans? Brett Okamoto here from the 5 Rounds podcast. On this week's episode, myself and Brian Campbell got into all of the drama between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. Is this fight happening? We also talked to TJ Dillashaw and Dwayne Ludwig. Tune in.
The NBA All-Star Game this Sunday.
Here's Curry behind the back, half-court heave on its way, and he hits it!
Coverage begins Sunday at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.